Thank you for coming to the Sociologists of Minnesota Keynote Address, co-sponsored by the Social Justice Lecture Series and the Kessel Peace Institute. I also want to offer some special thanks to the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences for allowing so many students to be able to participate in this year's conference. I want to thank my colleagues, and I should probably introduce myself though, I forgot that part. I'm Sarah Eplin. I'm a professor of sociology here, and I am the president-elect for the Sociologists of Minnesota, which this keynote address is for this conference. So I want to thank my colleagues in my Department of Sociology and Corrections for their support, encouragement, knocks on my door to check and make sure I'm doing okay, and all of those things. And especially Carol Glasser, who helped co-organize tonight's speaking event. And now I would like to introduce the student who will be introducing the keynote speaker. So we have layers of introductions here. Her name is Margarita Ruiz, and she's a first-generation Mexican-American. I first met her when she impressed me with her enthusiasm for sociology in my intro to sociology class in what seems like a while ago now. She has gone on to major in sociology and minor in political science, and she's one of my favorite kind of students to have, that enthusiasm that is contagious and that you know that they're going to go on and change the world. That's my favorite kind of student to have. For any of you of my current students, take note. I don't really have favorites, actually. Ms. Ruiz is a student activist who deeply cares about a range of social justice issues, especially migrant rights and wealth inequality. And she's been involved in a variety of organizations, such as Klobuchar for Minnesota 2018, the American Civil Liberties Union, College Democrats, and the Council of Social Activists. And I'm proud of her and delighted to have her introduce our speaker. Thank you, Margarita.
Yurie Hong is an associate professor of Greek, Latin, and classical studies and gender, women, and sexuality studies at Gustavus Adolphus College. She was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, attended UCLA for her bachelor's, and earned her PhD at the University of Washington in Seattle. Her research focuses on representations of women and childbirth in Greek literature and ancient medical texts. She is the founder and lead coordinator of the grassroots group Indivisible St. Peter Greater Mankato, which seeks to inform, inspire, and empower community members to engage in civic action in whatever form they can. She is particularly interested in gender and racial justice, immigrants' rights, and strengthening our democracy. I have the great honor of introducing one of the guiding lights for activists in these dark hours. She truly is an inspiration for people who want to change the world, and I hope to one day make as much of an impact as her. Please help me in welcoming Yurie Hong.
Hello? Oh, there it is. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really touched. First of all, I was very touched to be asked. I'm a classicist, so I work on ancient texts, as Margarita said. So to be asked to give a keynote for the Sociologists of Minnesota conference and to be part of the Social Justice Lecture Series is quite an honor for me. And I have to say that it's a bit overwhelming because those of you who are in academia will probably be familiar with the term imposter syndrome, the idea that the more that you know, the more that you realize that you don't know, and I'm paraphrasing, Socrates here. And so it's an honor really to be here, especially because this is all fairly new for me, this activist life. And also, I'm so pleased to see so many of you come out on this this Thursday night, this rainy Thursday night. It was so beautiful yesterday, and today it was kind of cold and rainy, and things seem kind of off. There's like a chill in the air, almost like a disturbance in the force, and I don't know like what's going on, but things seem so weird right now. And so there's lots of other things you could have been doing with your time, and I appreciate that you've come to spend time with me and all of us here today. Seriously though, we live in really troubling and isolating times, and I think it's important to be together as a community affirming our values. And so that's what I want to focus on more today. Just to give you a sense of what I'm going to be talking about, the title of my talk is Words into Deeds, Making the Leap from Academia to Activism. I'm kind of leading a double life right now, and I have to toggle back and forth between two different brain spaces. By day, I teach ancient Greek and mythology and courses on sexuality and reproduction and things like that. And then by night and on weekends and breaks and every other moment that I can, I'm doing this stuff. I'm engaged in social justice activism, trying to do what I can to increase civic education and political engagement and things like that. None of this was something that I ever expected. And so what I'd like to talk about today is kind of how did this happen? I'm going to be focusing on this concept of making the leap from academia to activism, and how did a life of the mind in academia turn into a life of kind of action in the streets, so to speak. So I'm going to focus on the getting from point A to point B in my own life story, not because it's the story that everyone's going to have, but because it can help to kind of demystify what it looks like for that transformation to happen. And what that looks like for everyone else in this room is going to be very different, and it's going to be very particular to your own history. So I'm going to talk about my story, and then I'm going to go into some of the paths forward that you might consider for yourselves, and you might already be engaged in as well. So there's a concept that's been helpful to me in thinking about the paths that we take in life and the paths that we might take in future. And it's called 6 Degrees of Separation. How many of you have heard of this movie or seen it? It's a really wonderful movie. I saw it in 1993 when it came out. It's based on a play, and it had a huge impact on the way that I view the world and how we tell stories about ourselves. So I'm just going to play you a quick clip here.
I read somewhere that everybody on this planet is separated by only 6 other people. 6 degrees of separation between us and everyone else on this planet. The President of the United States, or gondolier in Venice, just fill in the names. I find that extremely comforting that we're so close, but I also find it like Chinese water torture that we're so close, because you have to find the right 6 people to make the connection.
This clip had a huge impact on me for a number of reasons. I liked the idea that we are so close, that actually it's true, and they've done actually mathematical studies. I don't know how you study this, but statistically, I think it is true that there's not that much separating each individual person from some other random other person. So I think that part is really cool because it tells us that we live in a much smaller planet than we think. But I also like the idea that things are connected and that you have to find those connections, and that it's not this linear thing, right? That any of these spots, you can slot out different things for the 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? I want to think about, again, this path, tracing the path from academia into activism, and identify what kinds of people and ideas and events have led me in my life to where I am now, and then reflect and suggest for other people what that path might look like for them. And I want to conclude with some thoughts about what it means to be doing this work out in the world, to be living in a world where you are separated from other people and concepts and events in the world by not that much. So, in terms of academics, I was born as the middle child. There I am right there. this doesn't work. I'm the middle child of 3 girls and 1 boy, born to my Korean American parents who came to Los Angeles in the 70s, and I was born and raised there. And in many ways, we were kind of very typical Korean American family for the time. My parents came with very little money, worked their way up, but they had a network, they had the educational background to very quickly then move into the middle class. And I was a very typical middle child, Asian girl middle child, in the sense that I was kind of the bridge, the peacemaker. I want everyone to be happy and comfortable. I want to fly below the radar. I was very introverted. I loved reading books. And I liked nothing better than hanging out with a book and reading more than talking to other people. Books felt safe to me. I could be whoever I wanted in those books and those stories. And I could experience and empathize with other people whose lives were very different from my own. I was more comfortable with those kinds of things than with other people, as I said. And so this is just kind of how I grew up, and my parents were always like, do your work is school. We'll do our work. Our work is to, support you guys and help us all survive. So we continued to do that, and my parents in many ways lived the American dream. All of their children graduated from college. My younger brother, actually in the middle there, he graduated with a sociology degree at University of California, Santa Cruz. So this also kind of has a special resonance for me. When I got to college, I really loved mythology as a child. I thought it made a lot of sense. And I loved how different but similar Greek mythology and the ancient world was to me. And when I got to college, I realized all of a sudden that I felt like raising my hand and participating in class, which I'd never done before. And so I thought, maybe I should major in this. So I majored in classics. I participated in class. I read all the things that I could and lived these very dramatic lives through these stories, and it really sparked my interest and engagement. And then when it came time to think about careers, I was like, all right, well, what should I do with my life? And I said, well, I should probably choose something that is valuable to me or seems like it's going to be a contribution. And I had 2 really amazing teachers in high school. So this is Rick Takagaki, who's my government teacher. He taught us to ask the big questions and then to interrogate ourselves personally. Like, why did we think the things that we thought were normal, and what was the right thing to do, what was the right path, what would happen if we chose a different path? And he would make students really uncomfortable, and they would come back year after year and say, I was going to go and I was going to make a lot of money, and then you totally changed my life, and now I'm poor, but I'm happy and I'm wise, and all these kinds of things. And Montserrat Fontes, she's a Mexican-American, she was my English teacher, and she was amazing. She taught me how to read closely, to sink down and look at the words on the page, and to really kind of grapple with the meanings in texts. And that served me well in terms of going into classics, because if you know anything about ancient Greek or Latin, it takes you a really, really long time to read those words and understand what they're saying. Those 2 things together, these 2 teachers together, inculcated in me a desire to ask the big questions, but also to look at the particulars. And they inspired me to go on to I was like, I'll teach. And my mom said, well, at least get a PhD then. And then when the time came to think about what to get a PhD in, it was like, well, classics is the only thing that I actually worked harder at than I needed to get the grade that I wanted. So I went into classics. I went to University of Washington, and there, by chance, I fell into this topic mostly because of an ER episode. On this episode, there's a woman who comes in, she's in labor. By the end of the episode, the woman has died, and the man is sitting there with his son, who's just been born, and having to deal with these conflicting emotions of this new life that's come into the world, and this death that has just impacted him terribly. I saw that in my first year of graduate school, and it never left me, that human core and what that must be like. And so when it came time to choose a dissertation topic, I was like, well, I'll do it on representations of pregnancy and childbirth, I guess. And so that's what I did my graduate work on. After I graduated, I got the job at Gustavus. I was fortunate enough to get that. And I published some articles, and I wrote a couple reviews, and I started working on a book, that was going to grow out of my dissertation. But the other thing that I did was I sat in on a class called Sex, Power, and Politics, and I just wanted to. There was more that I wanted to learn, more about the modern world actually, and this was a poli-sci class, and it intrigued me in terms of thinking about ancient reproduction and modern reproduction. And so Gustavus has a Nobel conference on some scientific topic of great pressing ethical concerns and things like that. And so I submitted the topic, and then a couple of years later they said, oh hey, congratulations, your topic got chosen, which is reproductive technologies, and whoever chooses the topic gets to plan it. And I was like, what? No, I don't know how to do this. And they said, don't worry, we have the structure, we have a director, you'll get a lot of help. You just get to do the fun stuff, which is plan the shape of the conference and the themes and the speakers and things like that. So I got to take the work that I'd done, the interest that I had in the ancient world, and think about it in a different context in terms of the modern world. And this was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. It was intellectually stimulating, it was fun, it was impactful in ways that I can't even describe. And so this was a key moment in my just kind of personal journey and development. We brought people from all over the world. We brought specialists in reproductive science. We also brought a sociologist. That's her, Ruha Benjamin. She gave our keynote talk because we were trying to be very interdisciplinary. We brought a disability studies advocate to talk about eugenics and genetic testing and things like that. And so it was very impactful to have all of these people together talking about issues in a very three-dimensional kind of way, 360-degree kind of view. This took about 2 years to plan. We started planning in 2015. The conference itself was 2017. The other transformative moment on my life trajectory happened in between the planning and the actual conference itself, and that was the election of Donald Trump in 2016. Like many people, I was not expecting this outcome, and I was in a state of shock. And then after that kind of wore off, I was in a state of profound guilt that I had never been politically active or engaged before. I read a lot of news, I talked to my friends, I posted things on Facebook, I voted, I made sure my parents voted and everything. But I never did anything beyond that. And I had seen, some of my friends would go door knocking or something and they would post about that on Facebook, and I remember thinking, oh, I know that person. It's a thing that someone does, that someone I know does. Okay. After the election, I realized that there was a lot more that I could have done, and that I was part of the problem in thinking that just voting and being informed was enough. I didn't know quite what to do, but I knew that I needed to do something, mostly because one of my strongest memories from that, I have two strong memories. One from that evening, or the morning right after, was waking up, and the kids we have an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old who were younger at the time. They woke up and they said, oh, did Hillary Clinton win? And I remember just bursting out into tears and saying, no, I'm sorry. And they're like, oh, did you not get as many votes? I was like, no, that's not it either. And I did. I felt very sorry that I had let my children down for not fighting for the vision that I thought was going to be better for them. That, and then also facing my students and colleagues the next day who were distraught at what the future possibly could hold. So I was sitting with this for a while, and then after the inauguration in early 2017, so in January, this thing came out, the Indivisible Guide. It was a PDF, or it was a Google Doc, actually, originally, and some staffers in the Obama administration, some congressional staffers, put out this document that just outlines how you influence your member of Congress. This is how you make change. What is effective and what is not effective? How do you start a grassroots movement? How do you organize? It was a guide essentially for people like me, people who cared, but had never actually done anything before. I didn't grow up with any kind of civic engagement or anything. My parents, they came to the US, they worked, they kept their head down, they did what they were supposed to do, and that was that. Once I got this though, I started to see this is how it works. And given my experience with the Nobel Conference, I was like, well, I can run a meeting. I can make I make handouts. I put people in groups and have them do things. I know how to write emails, and I already post things on Facebook. And so sure, someone has given me a template. I'll try it out. This is what we came up with for a mission statement for this group. Indivisible St. Peter Greater Mankato was a nonpartisan community group dedicated to positive progressive action to make lives better and to create a more sustainable, equitable, and inclusive world. We seek to bring people together and educate, engage, and empower members to take action. It started off as a closed Facebook group at first. There was a friend of mine who lived in the community who kind of started it, and then I said, let's make it an indivisible group. And so we started just by tabling. Tabled at River Rock in St. Peter and said, hey, does anyone want to sign up for this group? We're going to start in a month. And so we did that for a few weeks. We got people who were interested, and then we held our first meeting at the co-op. And there were 65 people at that meeting. I was really excited, and everyone was just so relieved to be doing something and to be surrounded by other people who were interested in doing something and being together. It was a really, really exciting time. That petered out after a while. We had meetings regularly, but people didn't come all the time, and it was different people, and it was hard to keep that momentum going because people get tired. There's lots of things, right, that are calling on our time. And I didn't want to go anymore. I was like, I'm so tired, and if I'm in charge of it and it's really hard for me to drag myself there, then this isn't working. So we hit pause for a little while and kept things going on Facebook and posted news and things like that, and that was fine. And it wasn't until I read this book called At the Dark End of the Street about Black women's organizing during the Civil Rights Movement that a light came on. Because I was reading this book, totally unrelated. Someone told me that it was really good, so I was thumbing through it. And then I came across the part where it said the Montgomery bus boycott lasted for 385 days, I think. That's like over a year of not taking the bus, usually going long distances. And it blew my mind. I was like, wow, wait a second, how is that possible? What drives people to self-sacrifice that much? And it struck me at a certain point that it was like, oh, it's because they all knew each other. These are the church ladies. They saw each other every week. They'd grown up with each other. They could support each other. They could give each other rides. They could organize to watch each other's kids. They fed each other. They were together in community all the time. Supporting each other and then kind of holding each other's feet to the fire. And so that's what I realized was missing from our group, that we didn't actually know each other. So what we started doing instead is we focused in that first year on community building. We held what are called Solidarity Saturday and Solidarity Sunday potlucks. We alternate every 2 weeks. And do Saturday evenings or Sunday afternoons, so if people can't make one, they can make the other. They don't have to feel bad if they miss one because they don't have to wait for a whole month or anything like that, and it's in people's homes. We provided childcare, and usually, so after we eat together for the first half, we get to know one another. Then we would have usually some kind of an action or a speaker or someone we would talk about a thing. So there was something to take away. It wasn't just socializing. And that was really important because then we learned we had all these skills and people that we knew. And we took that out into the community. We had stories of immigration and democracy, so we brought people to come and share stories because it humanizes people to know each other's names, to see people in a room, and to learn about where they come from and what in terms of like their experiences and things like that. So that was something that we did. The other thing, as I said, right, so building community, and we wanted to educate. So we did a lot of Civics 101 stuff because there was a lot, I consider myself a fairly informed and educated person. At the same time, because politics wasn't something I followed that closely in its details, there was a lot that I didn't know until I started putting some of this stuff together. So we wanted to help lower the barriers for people and did things like prepare for caucuses. Like, what's a caucus? What's going to happen when you get there? It's kind of scary going into a room where you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know the people. But how can you participate in democracy if that's the general feeling, if no one knows what's going on? So we prepared for caucuses. We had someone come and tell us what was going to happen. A lot of people went to that caucus. A number of those people then went on to become delegates, which they never thought that they would do. A number of those people are now running for city council in St. Peter. So it's had this kind of really, this domino effect that's been pretty amazing. The other thing that we did, again, I like handouts. We created this election guide for the 2018 election. It was nonpartisan. We pulled the information just from their websites. We showed people who was on their ballot. And we gave it copies out at cafes. We had flyers around. And then also included in that was this kind of Civics 101, kind of a bunch of charts. I'm a visual person. So federal government, state government, what are the different offices? And what does the senator do versus a representative? And just kind of putting on maps. Like, so for federal representation, here's Minnesota. Your representatives go to Washington, D.C. Here's Minnesota. Your state representatives go to St. Paul, and here's Nicollet County, and here's, right? So just kind of really laying out very clearly for people who they were voting for, like what offices they were voting for and why. And then we put the candidates just side by side, again, just pulled directly from their own websites, because that's a lot, we didn't want to do, that's a lot of work to do your own reporting and interpreting. So for the candidates who had their own fancy websites, we just pulled from those. For candidates where races like county commissioner, those aren't going to get a lot of news coverage, so we held our own candidate forums and asked them questions and then just typed out their notes and their responses and put them on there so that people would know who to vote for. And people can vote for whoever they want. But it was information that we felt people should have. We also got involved in demos and campaigns. So we want to educate, and we feel that once people are educated on things, then they want to engage. And they go, oh yes, so now I know about this issue. How do I get involved in these other ways? So a lot of people volunteered for campaigns, tabled at events, marched in parades, door knocked to tell people face to face, right? Remind them that the election's coming up, and then also share what they thought were, who they thought were good candidates and what they should be thinking about in the ballot box. And we also went to schools, Gustavus, MSU, SEC, and we paid for a taco truck when we paired up with ACLU, and they paid for the taco truck, and we got students we distributed our election guide, and we got students to register to vote and encourage them to be voters for the rest of their lives, to be someone who learns about stuff and then who goes out and acts based on their knowledge of stuff. Not everyone does all of the same things. Some people aren't comfortable parading or door knocking. Some people are more introverted. So this was something that a friend of ours cooked up, literally, a progressive postcard writing dinner party. There are 3 of us Gustavus faculty who happen to live right next to each other in a row. So someone who was like, I'm not going to go out there and I'm just not, I don't want to talk to people, but I will host people at my house. I will, and I can write postcards. And so this was the perfect event. What we did was we wrote postcards all the way through the evening. At the first house, we had appetizers. And then the second house hosted the main meal, and then the third house hosted the dessert. And so you just move, and it's like you're with people, but you don't have to talk to anyone because you're writing postcards telling people to remember to vote. And then people who weren't engaged in other ways baked or cooked or offered up their home, and it was a way that they could be engaged as well. Because we believe that people should plug in wherever they can, and I'll talk a little more about that later. And bigger demonstrations. So larger demonstrations have a function to play in terms of bringing a lot more people, if there's a protest or a rally or a march. The visuals can engage people, it can engage the media, and the feeling of being there with a lot of people who care about the same things as you can be incredibly powerful. And so for a lot of people, that can be a first step. The climate strike, which was in St. Peter just a few weeks ago, 500 people came to that. It was amazing. And for a town, for an area this small, 500 people that's a lot. And it was incredibly powerful to see everyone kind of, looking around at each other and saying like, wow, look at this, like we all care about that. And then to see drivers drive by and honk at us and, kind of say like, yes, we agree with you. So those are the ways in which we tried to get people to engage. But then finally, the last bit is advocacy. We wanted to empower people to make their voices heard and take much more direct action and engage in the political process that way. So we kind of ramped it up. After the election, we started going on visits to our congressional representative's office, Jim Hagedorn. And so we went, we said, well, I've never been to a congressional representative's office before, and so if I haven't gone and that thought terrifies me, as someone who has like all kinds of privileges and things like that, then that would be scary for any random constituent. And so we will just go every week and, and then be there so that we can be there for anyone who would like to come along and share their concerns. And we're in and we're out, 15 minutes. We just said, I'm concerned about this, 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 and this. This vote is coming up. We would like, it to be known that we feel this way about gun safety, for example. This is one of our students, Luce, handing over information and letters that we collected from other students and constituents in the area. And this is Carrie Johnson, and she was talking about gun control and everything. They didn't like us much at that office, and they did eventually ban us for wasting their time, they said, because then, yeah. So that was exciting. It was concerning and disappointing, the idea that we couldn't visit our own representative's office to just share concerns that we had. So instead we took that outside, and so now we have Thursday demonstrations on the corner in front of the office, and I'm always surprised by the number of people that take the time to come in the middle of the day on a Thursday to stand on a corner with signs for an hour and be together and around any particular issue. And the last thing that we do, well, not the last, one of the things that we do as well, kind of in connection with this, is we go to town halls and we write letters to the editor, because representatives are supposed to hold town halls and meet with their constituents, and that's how they then represent them in Washington. And so we started going to town halls to get our representative on record for, well, what does our representative think? Does he share our values? And we're curious if, we're curious about where he stands on a host of issues and what his reasoning is. And maybe we're wrong. Maybe if we heard the reasoning, we would change our minds. And so this is one of the reasons why we go to the town halls. We meet up with other local activists and everything as well, because you can only ask a question if you are a resident of that county, despite the fact that he's a representative for the entire district. And so through these town halls, we've learned a lot of interesting things about Representative Hagedorn's positions, and then, and that's something that constituents should know. And so we view that as part of the educational piece of it. And then finally, we've been making connections across the district to engage other people. There have been other people in other areas, groups that are just now forming that are kind of like, yeah, we would like to also be engaged with these things. How can we work together and share information across town lines and things like that? And so that's been very exciting. We had a CD1 summit this summer, and we got representation from about half of the districts, or half of the counties in the district. And we've been making a lot more connections. And so it's been really interesting for me as an introverted Korean American woman from Los Angeles to know so many Minnesotans across the district that I live in now. And it makes me better informed about the issues that are facing my neighbors and my fellow citizens and people. So it's been really interesting for me to reflect on my path here. It'll look really different for other people, and I want to credit those of you who are already doing it, probably have already been doing it for much longer than I have. It's been interesting to think about the ways in which academics and activism are not actually opposing different things, that the skills that I gained in academia, to read closely, to be able to summarize arguments, to be able to think critically about pieces of information, and then to be able to communicate my own positions on them, that those are all things that, you know, are crucial to doing activism and doing it well. So just some reflections and suggestions and things to keep in mind that I've been kind of mulling over. The importance of connections and contexts. That the things, and I see a lot of students in the room here, that the things that go on in your classroom and the things that go on outside your classroom, all of those things are connected. There's no such thing as like you graduate and then you're in the real world. It's like, well, you know, academia is a real world too. It's real to me. It's real to students, right, whose lives are shaped by it every day. And so giving students as many opportunities, and for students taking as many opportunities to connect the dots between what you're learning in the classroom and what's going on in the outside world. Those boundaries, there should be no boundary between those things. I think that's really important. And again, this kind of idea of 6 degrees of separation, that ideas and issues are related to you in intimate ways. And then also to see the context in which things happen. That none of these things or issues arises kind of on its own, that they're all actually really connected. In many ways, it's not really about 6 degrees of separation, it's more like a web, right? And then you can choose, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or this way, or whatever way, right? And that actions have consequences, that there's a domino effect, that again, you can trace in all of these different paths, that will have an effect on, you know, what kinds of actions you should take or not take. What are the impacts? And then connections between people. The ability to connect and create a network, you know, kind of as I was saying, you know, across CD1, for example, or connect with a person that maybe you have a disagreement with and be able to find some point of connection where you can come to an understanding. Or maybe not. Maybe that's not possible, right? The other thing that came to my mind is focus. When trying to decide what it is you want to focus on, there are so many things to focus on. And so, you know, first of all, going with your personal interests, right? What's the thing that moves you the most? I've been surprised by the things that I'm personally invested in, that for some reason or other, I have not been pulled in that direction in my activism. I don't work on reproduction in my activism very much. I don't know why that is. It's something I care about, but I've been more interested in this democracy part of it, in the democratic institutions and things like that. I don't work on democracy in my classics field. Like, that's not what I work on. So I think there's something I can suss out there. But figuring what it is your personal interests are, what are you drawn to, and then figuring out on what level are you going to advocate for something. So for example, I have a picture here of if accessibility and disability rights, if that's something that interests you or you've noticed, right? You could go straight to the top and then feel very overwhelmed, or you could be like, well, here's this one building right here. This one building, this one campus, or on this one street that's not accessible. What can you do to get that fixed, right? Who do you contact to kind of be like, hey, what's the issue here? Why isn't this accessible? And then understanding, again, that bigger picture of whose job is it to fix that? Is it the cities? Is it the states? Do you then go all the way up to the Supreme Court, right? I mean, and go on the federal level? You can oftentimes make your biggest impact locally. And so some of the earliest things that I ever did just kind of on my campus at Gustavus were things where I'm like, oh, well, that's dumb. You could fix that pretty easily. So for example, at Gustavus, when I was pregnant with our first child, I went and I talked to every single female faculty member that I knew who'd had a kid. And I said, what was your deal? What was your parental leave deal? What was your deal? What did you do? And then I said, well, that was dumb. Why did I need to talk to 6 or 7 different people and have coffee 6 or 7? It was lovely, don't get me wrong. It was nice to hang out with them. I said, there should just be one place of like a menu of options. And they said, okay, put together a menu of options. And, and that was very helpful for people, even though like I didn't make it better. I didn't make our parental leave, options better. I just made it more transparent by saying, let's put it all in one place. And that gave people something to stand on. So starting small, starting local, and fixing something that you can work on, but also recognizing where it is that you can make those structural changes. This, I think, is really important in considering the kinds of activism that you might do or are already engaged in and might need to make some tough decisions. What's sustainable? So this know thyself, that's a tricky, it's a Greek saying, it kind of shows up all over the place. The Delphic oracle, which likes to give riddling kind of fortunes to people, says you have to know yourself. What are your skills? What's your capacity? What's your role? If you're a student, you might find that you've got a lot of things calling for your time and attention. If you're a faculty member, if you're a parent, right, there are all of these things calling for our time and attention. So the way you can make the most impact is to do the thing that is sustainable for you, the things that don't cost you that much. It doesn't cost me that much to post things on Facebook, because I'm on my phone all the time anyway. It doesn't cost me that much to just show up to a place and hang out with my friends on a Thursday afternoon. It's a thing I enjoy. It might cost someone else quite a lot to do those things. There are lots of roles that people have played in, all of those activities that I told you about that Indivisible has done. A lot of people did a lot of those parts of things, right? Like cooking, baking, hosting, organizing big events, coordinating, networks of people, and I so appreciated everyone who took any kind of small piece of that. Even just someone who would say, I can post flyers around town. Just that in and of itself was like, oh, thank God, because I don't know when I would be able to go and drive around and do it myself. These are people who offered, right? Artwork, I think, is really important, and engagement in the arts, making this stuff fun. So we had graphic designers who were very creative but couldn't do a lot of other things, but they could slap together a poster like nobody's business in 10 minutes. And we sold a lot of posters. We printed them out and we sold them as our first fundraiser, and that helped us get food for some events and printing for our election guide and things like that. So those were huge contributions. And also music, right? So we have people who like to sing, and so that we have an indivisible choir. They get together and they like to sing together, and it's amazing to have them come, and then they lift your spirits, right? People, this is really hard work, sometimes very tedious work. And the more that we can remind each other of the things that make life worth living and that make us happy and community together with one another, that's a real contribution. So the choir is one thing. I love this picture because they're all doing different things, right? One kid's just being really excited. Some kids are looking straight ahead and being very focused and singing what they're supposed to be singing. Other kids are looking off to the side and everything. And everyone contributes in the way that they can. Do what you can when you can, and do not feel bad about the things that you cannot do. I think the guilt and shame are not super useful emotions for motivating you to do the things that you want to do. The other tricky thing about this know thyself little maxim is that it's kind of a trick. There is no stable self for you to ever just know and be done with. You're always changing. You're always growing. So that self, when I said know your skills and know your capacity, that can change. A lot of the things that I've been involved in the last couple of years would have cost me a lot a couple of years ago. But little by little, I pushed myself out of my comfort zone, and I grew into those skills and capacities that I never, ever would have guessed that I had. So keep an open mind to that too. And the last thing I wanted to just kind of mention in this portion of the talk is to accept humanity. And I mean this in all of its permutations and possible meanings. Accept humanity's capacity to be kind and to be loving and to be cruel and to be hateful and to dehumanize others and to resist and persist and be resilient and all of those things. Accept humanity's limitations. The fact that, and I draw a lot on my reading of Greek tragedy for this, that humans are mortal, We have limitations. We don't know all of the things. We can't do all of the things. My dad, who grew up during the Korean War, would say things like, he's very fatalistic. He would say things like, you don't control your life. Other people control your life, and all you can do is try and influence those people to control your life in the way that you want. And I remember thinking, like, this is really wrong. Like, no, America says you can do whatever you want to be. And I was like, you know what? He's right, though. You can't control someone and make them fall in love with you. You can't make someone give you a job, right? You can try and influence them. And I wrestled with this for a long time, and I realized that there is something liberating to recognizing your limitations, to recognizing no one in this room is so important that if you don't do that one thing, then like the whole world is going to fall apart, or that you're the only one who can solve a problem or save everybody. So you do what you can do, and that's something that's a more manageable kind of idea. And something that someone said to me when I first started doing this was like, you know, everything you do is a plus. Because if you didn't do it, then it wouldn't get done. So anything that you do, even if it doesn't work out quite the way you wanted or as good as you wanted, it's a plus. And I was like, oh, well, that's nice. So there's a certain amount of humility that I think is really important to accept, both for yourself and then also for others. That I disappoint myself all the time. And I find myself disappointed in other people's limitations. But then accepting that, you know, they're human too. We all get to be human. And that sometimes people have not been cared for in their lives. And that's what makes them the way they are today. That's a really important thing to remember that helps me when I'm dealing with someone who I'm like, why are you being so difficult? And it's like, well, it must be hard for you too. I'm just going to leave it at that. And I will do what I can do over here. And that's been very helpful for me. The other thing that's helpful for me is to think about, in terms of limitations, and how liberating that can be, is to recognize that to be human is to struggle. And that the goal here is not to win. There is no such thing as winning in this political landscape or just in history. There's just struggling for what you think is right. And doing that in a way that is going to be effective and sustainable for you. And recognizing that it's about the role that we decide to play in that struggle. Because it's happening no matter what. The role that we decide that we want to play in that struggle is the thing that's up to each one of us to decide. So this is Banksy. If you get tired, learn to rest, not to quit. I'm sure you might have seen some, this meme or quote going around about staggered breathing, that in a choir, everyone doesn't have to sing all at the same time, all the time. That if you get tired, you run out of breath, you just take a breath at a different time as someone else. And the rest of the choir is going to carry you along. And no one notices, and it's okay, and you come back when you've got your breath back. We have a lot of members in our group that do this, and I think it's really important. I need to do it at some point as well myself, and sometimes I do, but it's something that I recognize that I have a ton of privileges in this situation that allows me to do the kind of work that I do. So despite the fact that I'm a woman, I'm a racial minority, and I'm an outsider from Los Angeles, I have a job, I have tenure, I have a husband who will just pick up the slack wherever I leave it. It's a lot of slack. I have 2 kids who are old enough that they don't need me that much. They miss me when I'm gone, but they don't, fall apart. They don't have emotional challenges or anything that I really need to address. So I have a lot of privileges that allow me to do this work, and it allows me to do it for people who can't at the moment that they might particularly be in. So it's okay to come in and out of things and to recognize your limitations and kind of fill your bucket so you can come back later. I want to share just a few tools. If you have a phone or something, you might want to take a picture of some of these tools and download these apps later. These are really low bar, easy things to get involved, or to do, right? That actually have a huge impact. Remember I said, here are some ways that you can influence your member of Congress. Sad to say, but calling people on the phone is a really big one, because someone is there writing down every time someone calls on a particular issue, and if there's enough people calling, and not that many people call, so it doesn't take that much for it to be a lot of people, it makes a big difference. This is ResistBot. So if you really don't like talking to people, you can text them your message. Takes 2 minutes. You just type in 50409 on your text. It'll find out who represents you in Congress, and it'll turn your text into an email or a fax or a letter and deliver it. And so you can be walking to your car and say, I think it's really wrong to keep kids in cages at the border. And then they'll send it for you. And you don't have to talk to a person. 5Calls is another app that I really like. And this, it'll give you a list. It's also a website, so if you don't like using your phone. This, you can choose an issue that concerns you of that particular moment. It'll give you information, and then it'll tell you who's the person that you call for that. Because it does no one any good to call the governor for something that the governor is not responsible for. So this takes the guesswork out of it. So you click on somebody, and then what I would do is I would put the phone on speaker, I would dial, and then they even give you a script. So you can say, hi, I'm outraged and appalled by the reports of abuses to detained immigrant, right? And then if you can riff off of that, and you're like, because I saw this thing on the other, on the news, and this is really bothering me. My child is about the age of the kid that died, right? That you can personalize that. The first time you do it, it's scary and it's awkward. And then the more you do it, it's not something you even have to think about that much. So it'll dial directly for you. You can also call like in the evening and just leave a voicemail. That's less scary. But this is this is a thing that is effective. Countable is also another app that tells you how your representatives voted on what particular issues. The thing I like about this one is that you can have an argument in favor and an argument opposed, and they have a resource that helps people find all of the places to send their letter to. Takes all the guesswork out of it, how many words it needs to be, and things like that. And then you'll go, oh, so I wrote this thing as 250 words. I can send it to 5 places because they all have 250 word limits. And so it gets the word out there more. This is the hardest hitting and most effective, but also the most time consuming. And therefore, because of that, more convincing advocacy thing that you can do. I want to conclude with just a couple of thoughts. This talk is called Words into Deeds, the title of it. It's a bit of a false dichotomy though. As you've seen from the last few slides, with those tools, words are deeds. You are doing something when you talk to people, when you communicate with them across different platforms and across different categories of power. Words are deeds. And you're not making so much of a leap from academia to activism as transferring the skills that you have already, that you're gaining and continuing to refine, and transferring them into a different realm, which is what education is supposed to be for. It's the reason, we're a democracy. If we're going to have democracy by, for, of people, you need to have people who are educated. I do this because despite all the sacrifices and the hard work and all of that, I want to be able to look my kids in the eye and say that I did everything that I could this time around for them. And I didn't just let things happen and feel things about it. I do it because it feels better to do something than to just stay up until 4 a.m. reading the news and crying, which is what I was doing for a good part of the earlier part of 2017, late 2016, early 2017. None of this stuff was a foregone conclusion, the good or the bad. When we tend to think of fate, right? When you see point A and you see point B pretty clearly, it looks like, oh, this very neat path, right? 6 degrees of separation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and here's how I landed where I am. The Greeks thought about the future and the past differently, though. We think about the future as something that's ahead of you, right? The Greeks thought about future as something that's behind you. So, if this is the past, you're backing into the future, which actually makes more sense because you can see what's in front of you, but you can't see what's behind you. You don't know what the future holds. And every time you take a step back, the meaning of your story changes. You take a step back, other things have happened, the meaning of your story has changed again. Your narrative, you're the one who's in control of that. And the steps that you take, even though you don't know where they're leading you, you decide what that narrative means. The last thing I'm going to say, and I swear I'll stop talking, is that I started by saying that I got into classics because I love stories. Aesop's Fables, one of the early texts that kids are introduced to. There's a story that was very influential to me about a man and his gold. There was a man who had a lump of gold. He dug a hole in the backyard and buried it. And every day he would dig it back up and look at it and admire it and then bury it again. And then one day a thief came and stole the gold. And he went to his neighbor really upset and he said, "Someone stole my gold." And the neighbor turned around and gave him another stone and said, "Here, take this stone, bury it in the backyard, and dig it up and look at it every day. Because that's all the good that your gold did you. If you don't take your gifts and put them out in the world, they're not really gifts that you're using. That's going to look different for every single person in this room, and it might look different today versus 5 years from now or 10 years from now, and that's okay. But it's just something to think about when you think about kind of your role in this world and the narrative that's being created at this very moment. Where are you going to fit? Thank you.
We have some time for questions. If you have some questions.
Thank you very much for that. Can I add one little dimension to what you said? Your whole thing is moving from academia to activism. And I'm from a generation, I'm old enough to be from a generation where I started with activism and moved to academia.
Yep.
I was a college sophomore in 1970 at the height of the anti-war movement, and the slogan was "From protest to resistance." This protest wasn't working, so we shut down the university. And it happened all over the country. Now, for the next couple of decades, people moved into academia. The bad side of it was some of them became co-opted professional academics. We had academic Marxists and academic feminists and things, jargon that no one understood, and say, "You must be an expert, we'll give you tenure." But there are a lot of progressive activists who found footholds in the social sciences that can be a resource today. And there's a grain of truth when Fox News says the liberals are taking over the university. They say it like it's a bad thing. I happen to think it's a good thing. But there are resources there. And what struck me, so much of what you said about the kind of activism you're doing is backed up by tons of social movement theory, social movement research, social ties, the networks that allow activism to be effective. There's a ton of research and literature that backs that up in the social sciences. And so one of the challenges, I think, is to completely close the loop so that each side is continually informing the other. And with Carol's social justice lecture series and things like that, that's a way to kind of keep the circle connected. So it can go ways from activism to academia and the other way around.
Yes, and I'm so glad that you brought that up because that was one of the things I was going to say. I was going to say words and deeds, it's a false dichotomy, and activism and academia, that's also a false dichotomy. And I've forgotten, so I'm really thankful that you brought that up. And that's absolutely true, that the two things have to actually go together because they in fact do. And it's a bit sad that each generation have to forget and remember that, I think. But it is, that deep history is important to acknowledge, so thank you, I appreciate that.
I just have a question just about Jim Hagedorn and how indivisible has been banned. But he hasn't banned individual people, correct?
He has said that he bans everyone who is associated with indivisible across all of southern Minnesota. I don't personally know how he would implement that because I don't know who identifies as indivisible members because we don't We don't have dues. There are no card-carrying members. There's some people who are on our Facebook page who I don't know that they would identify as indivisible members. So I know that I'm banned personally. But there are lots of people who've never set foot in his office. Is someone from St. James who, reads our posts, are they banned? I don't know. How do you implement that even? So we gotta find out at some point.
So as you become more involved then, how has your political positions changed or been reinforced?
That's a really good question. I think it's not so much that they've changed as that they've deepened and become more connected to people. So as I become more involved, I hadn't ever thought about farmers, for example, before, and what kinds of policies are helpful or harmful to farmers, or what kinds of challenges farmers might face, or the distinction between a small farmer versus a corporate farm. And so I think my values have gotten clearer. I would like to say that I have conversations across the aisle all the time, and I don't actually outside of the classroom. In the classroom, if students come, students come from all over the place, and I'm there to educate them and help them to think critically and read and write, in an effective way. And however they want to take those skills into the world, that is up to them. But in my non-school life, my focus is on learning as much as I can about the nuances of an issue, and then trying to advocate for those as best as I can. It would cost me a lot, I think, to do that kind of really important hard work of real across the aisle of discussion, but it's so important, and I have huge amounts of respect for people who do it, and it's something that I'm girding my loins to be able to branch off into that area as well. But I think for me it's not so much about political positions as it is values and practices, I guess.
It seems to me that there may be a bit of a tension between saying this is a nonpartisan organization, point people to websites that have arguments on both sides, but I'm clearly hearing some progressive politics.
Sure.
And I guess if you have a deep enough faith in democracy, empowering everyone across the spectrum would be a good thing. But you sense some tension and you want to empower everyone regardless of their degree of climate deniers as well. Is that a tension you feel, and how do you deal with that?
So I'm hearing two things. One question is about the nonpartisan thing. And nonpartisan doesn't mean neutral. It doesn't mean no opinion. It just means that we're not beholden to any particular party. So if the Democrats put up a candidate that we were like, no, we wouldn't feel like we needed to support that person. And so that's my kind of understanding of nonpartisan and where our group stands in terms of we're progressive, and so we're for a lot of those policies. In terms of the other part of your question, which is about empowering, everybody and all of that, to me, I think the educational piece is really important. So for climate deniers, the educational piece is key. That we want to make it as clear as possible, or reach across the aisle as much as possible. Ideally, that's what we want to. We want to empower people with knowledge, I guess. And for me, what's more in line with my approach at the moment is I'm going to empower the people that I think are doing things that I would like to support and empower. If someone else wants to empower other people, they're doing that. So it's not. I don't view our group as kind of carte blanche, empowering everyone to do all of the things outside of the classroom. Classroom is a little bit different because there you have an educational purpose and you're giving students tools. But again, you can't make people do things with that power. I'm trying to empower people who I think I want to support. So I don't know if that answers your question quite. But yes, I think that it can be challenging to recognize the power of, other interests that kind of go against ours. But at the same time, that's, it is democracy. It is what we have.
When you first started doing this work, did you have a hard time negotiating the tensions between your paid labor and then your volunteer labor as an activist? And how'd you negotiate how you manage those things?
I think about that a lot because I recognize it in the classroom. There is a huge power imbalance between the faculty member and the students. I don't talk about my activist work outside of the classroom, in the classroom. I might tell students, hey, you guys should pay attention to the news. Did you hear this is what's going on? Do you have any questions? And give them context and all of that. The students who are really interested in getting involved, they know to find me. I don't chase them down or recruit anybody. I don't think that's really an appropriate use of my position. And so those really exist to the degree that I can into different realms, because I don't want a student feeling like I'm going to judge them if they don't come to a thing, or and so I try to just kind of wear different hats very carefully. But I also think that just because you're a paid person in one context doesn't mean that you aren't allowed to be a citizen in another context. So it has been uncomfortable. I'm not super comfortable with having my name out in lots of venues because then people will know and being out and all of that. But it is what it is. So.
I actually have a question. What kind of advice could you give to students who might feel powerless, or that they're not old enough or wise enough or have enough resources to make any change? And I teach students, so I know that students often feel powerless to do anything. What kind of advice can you offer them if they're feeling like they want to but feel that they can't?
Mm-hmm. This sounds really cheesy to say, or not cheesy, but simplistic to say, but those phone calls, that's a really easy way to kind of get your feet wet with things. But young people have so much power, and I was told this by, someone who's our county commissioner. He was like, young people don't have any idea how terrified politicians are of them. Because the stereotype is college students, they don't barely know how to vote, they don't barely know how to feed themselves and go to class and get dressed, and they're all, they can't do anything, and so they're not going to vote, so we're not going to really even reach out to them. They're not the voting bloc, right? So when young people actually do something, then they sit up and they listen, because young people are going to be voting for a lot longer than people my age or someone who's retired. And when young people get activated and energized, then politicians are kind of like, oh no. And so, and I'm not kidding, like the number of people who call politicians and say, hey, can you do this for me? Or hey, I really feel strongly about this. There's not that many, actually. So if you got like 10 of your friends and you're like, hey, we're all gonna call about this, we're gonna have a phone banking party, and then you just one after another do it, that's like a good chunk of the calls they get for that day on that one issue. And that information trickles up, right? Staffers have to sit there and like listen to you, like, oh, another person called, oh, another person called. And then they talk to their representative and they'll go, well, a bunch of people called about this issue, so, no one else called about these other issues. And that's kind of, you go with the feedback that you get. And then once people start to become afraid that, they're not gonna get reelected, then that's how the Tea Party was so effective. It wasn't because the Tea Party represented so many people. It's just that you got a lot of people, or you had a core group of really, really committed people who were tenacious and made their voices really loud. So I would say start there, and then also, talk to the, the other thing I was really glad that you brought up was the fact that faculty have a lot of resources, like a lot of knowledge, right? Like, if you're a student, and you're kind of like, hey, there's this issue that I'm concerned about, talk to a faculty member and ask them what you should do in that particular instance. They have a lot of wisdom to give you. and then hook up with an organization and see if you can just show up to a thing. There's something really powerful about embodying stuff. I can't tell you how excited. There's a friend of mine for that climate strike. A bunch of us were milling around and kind of waiting for it to start. And she was like, oh no, people aren't gonna come. And then like the Gustavus students came down the hill and she was like, it was like Gandalf at the end of the Lord of the Rings movies. You know? And like here they come to save the day. There's a ton of power in that. Don't underestimate all of those things.
I've heard that some politicians' offices multiply one call by a factor of 100 or something as an estimate of how many people really think that way but don't call.
Right.
So if you call in, you could be speaking with 100 voices just by doing it.
Right.
They'll do that calculation.
Mm-hmm. No, and it's the same thing, you know, like anyone who wants feedback on anything is going to magnify the number, you know, the feedback that you get. So if you do, you know, like I know for myself, if I have student evals at the end of the semester and half the class doesn't say anything, and then the other half, like, you know, 3 people all complain about one thing, and then the other, you know, the rest of them are kind of like, you know, saying different things. I'm like, well, 3 people talked about the same thing. Everyone must think that the readings are too long. But the other half of the class didn't say anything, probably because they thought everything was fine. But those 3 people, and now everyone's got shorter reading assignments. So see, it works.
Thank you very much.